Okay, let's get it going. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kai Fox. I'm an assistant professor of aquaculture in the College of Tropical Ag and Human Resources at UH Manoa. This is another Hawaii Aquaculture Collaborative Brown Bag. It's a collaboration between UH CTAR and Sea Grant, Hawaii Sea Grant. I'm joined by Annie Rosa, also from Hawaii Sea Grant. Today, our special guest is Tori Spence McConnell from the NOAA Fisheries Pacific Islands Regional Aquaculture Coordinator position, and she's going to talk about aquaculture opportunity areas. So please take it away, Tori. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Kai, and thank you everyone for being here today. As Kai said, I am Tori Spence McConnell. I'm the Regional Aquaculture Coordinator for the NOAA Fisheries Office, the Pacific Islands Regional Office here. I sit within our regional office, which you may know through fisheries permitting, and we also work closely with the Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center. I also work, although I work in this office here, I work very closely with the National Headquarters Office of Aquaculture. And they're actually the ones who are kind of spearheading this whole process of aquaculture opportunity areas. So I wanted to just share a little bit of information about these opportunity areas, what they are, what they could be, information about the request for information, just kind of offering an opportunity here for us to chat, talk story, have a better understanding of what they are. And I can just jump right into that here. So I will be sharing some links throughout the chat. And Kai will hopefully help repost them just in case any new people join. I wanted to also make clear that we are talking about a request for information, which is on the Federal Register. And so the first things I've already posted in the chat and we've reposted are actually those links to formally submit your public comment. So today's not a public comment session. Happy to sit through chatting and thinking through and brainstorming and understanding. But if you want to submit a public comment, then you can do that either written on the Federal Register, regs.gov, or you can join into a listening session, which there's one more scheduled, I believe it's next week. So quick overview. What are AOAs? Where are they? What's the process? How do I comment? And then we'll just jump into talk story after that. So AOAs are a spatial analysis and environmental planning tool. They minimize interactions with other ocean users in state and jurisdiction or federal waters. So far, we can jump into this in a moment, but so far we have identified AOAs in federal waters, and also we are in process of identifying AOAs in some state waters. So we can talk a little more about what that means later. But the identification process is actually pretty stakeholder driven. It's in two phases. The first phase is this suitability analysis, which is multi-stakeholder participatory mapping is kind of how I like to describe it. And then at the end of phase one, that suitability analysis, everything that they've learned goes into the environmental analysis. And this environmental analysis meets the requirements for National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. This is something that's, there's kind of a copycat version for state of Hawaii. A lot of states and jurisdictions have their own version of NEPA, but we can also get into more info on what that in a moment. So AOAs are identified already in the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America. This process started back in 2020, so there have been some name changes along the way. And they're also identified in Southern California. So there is an ongoing process in Alaska. The AOAs are kind of, where did they come from? Who's deciding to do this and why are we doing this? Well, the federal government always operates under directives. So we got to be able to point to acts of Congress, executive orders to direct our work. And this is actually coming from an executive order back in May 2020. And this order asked NOAA to identify geographic areas for AOAs. That's kind of the phase one. And then also produce a PEIS, which is the Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement. That's the NEPA document I was referring to earlier. And the PEIS, or the NEPA document, that's actually what can help with permitting. None of this is a permitting process, but it does create enabling conditions. If someone were to try and seek a permit, they would have more information on the pre-permitting side of things. After identifying and going through this process at least once, we've been directed to keep going through the process as we can. So here's a visual for the process. Again, we've got phase one here on the left, and that star indicates we're at the very beginning of a phase one, which is where should we start the process next? So this whole public comment session that I mentioned earlier that we have links in the chat, that's all for figuring out nationally where to go next. Did I? No, I have more links that I'll be putting in soon. Watch out. So these are the product of phase one, and you can actually download them here. Now, the Alaska one is pretty cool because all of these are PDFs that you can download. I actually have a hard copy. You know what? I should grab this. Hold on. This is perhaps a bit more, the largest one we have so far, but this is the hard copy of the Alaska Aquaculture Atlas. It is quite thick and has green on the side, which is pretty cool. But if you're wondering what kind of information gets produced from phase one, it is just a wealth and a plethora of maps that overlap, and all kinds of stakeholders are included in that. So that atlas, again, you can download them. Alaska has a digital one that's actually interactive. So again, it's actually the largest atlas that we've produced so far for this process. Makes sense that we have a digital version, but the digital atlas link is also there. And so phase one has been completed for all three of these locations. Now phase two, the programmatic environmental impact statement for an AOA, that's only been completed in the first two AOAs that were identified. Alaska is still in progress. But if you'd like to see what those documents look like, you can download them here. Unfortunately, I don't have a hard copy of any of those, but these documents are more page limited, so they won't be nearly as long as the atlases that are more of a science product. And lastly, again, information about how to actually submit a comment. You can take a screenshot of this. The links are also in the chat. There will be a public listening session coming up on August 31st. All three of the listening sessions were held at times that were reasonable for Hawaii, and two of them were held at times that were reasonable for the Marianas. So I was really happy to see that we were being as inclusive as possible in this process. And before we get into talk story, I did want to just touch on a few common questions that we get or key points about AOAs. Want to reiterate, we have not identified any AOAs here in the Pacific Islands region. For NOAA, the Pacific Islands region does cover the Hawaiian Islands, as well as American Samoa, the Marianas, and we just changed the name and I just forgot it, but the various atolls that are also associated with U.S. fisheries in the Pacific. This is a planning process. It's not a regulatory process. It can seem confusing because I myself sit in a regulatory office, but this process itself is not intended to lead to a permit. So we're not adding any authorities to NOAA or any other agency. And again, since they're not pre-permitted, this is essentially information and pre-work that someone can use if they want to apply for a permit. It doesn't change any leasing permit requirements for any federal or state waters. They can be cited again in state or jurisdiction waters, but that's only if the governments there specifically invite this process to happen in their waters. Otherwise, we would only be looking at federal waters in any given region. And the size, location, farm type, what you'll be raising, that kind of a thing, that's all determined in phase one. That spatial analysis, public input, that really is the big stakeholder input phase where we get a lot of people in a room to start talking about overlapping interests and where to go, where not to go, that kind of thing. And then identifying these locations doesn't actually happen until the end of phase two. So the first phase produces this pile of information, and then phase two takes that pile of information, distills it a little bit further, and analyzes the environmental impacts. And the final product of that is a document that says these are the AOAs that are defined for this area or region. Um, and another thing to note too, if somebody wants to start an aquaculture project in an area that has, I'm misusing the term area here, in a region that maybe has an AOA identified, those new projects don't have to site their project in an AOA. They can find other sites if they want to. This is just intended to help be a broad area that could help provide some of that pre-work or information needed to try and apply for a permit. A big part of that is site analysis. So this is essentially doing kind of some high level site analysis on some broad areas. So with that, we can jump into any questions anyone has or talk story. And I wanted to thank you all again for being here, being willing to chat. And I realized I didn't put my email there, but let me add it to the chat so that you can also email me anytime too.
Thanks, Tori. Really been working really hard on this stuff. Anybody have any questions?
I can kick off, Kai. Tori, thanks for the overview. Probably first one is just, our region, I think it was 2022, already has a PEIS for an aquaculture management program. How does that kind of fit into this whole process?
That's a great question. I thought about putting that in the slides because that's something that's on my mind a lot too. I was a part of writing that, and we finished that in 2022. That was intended for a potential permitting program in conjunction with basically under MSA, Magnuson-Stevens Act. So working with Fisheries Management Council because they had actually started that process back in 2009, I think, to start looking at a permitting program, what it mean, how to do that. So that permitting program, if you'll notice, has not shown up anywhere in the Federal Register. But the PEIS is still out there for information. So even though it was written and attached to a permitting program, it's something that could certainly help inform other aquaculture projects that need environmental information. So far, if you're an aquaculture company that is looking to get a permit in, say, like federal waters in Hawaii, you could use information from the PEIS to inform some of your site analysis. Hopefully, it's a little bit of the pre-work done. We're still kind of working out what that would mean if there were an AOA in this region, and how that would impact the second phase of the AOA process. Does that help answer your question at all?
It does, but I do still think it's, it opens up a couple questions about who it seems to establish, and maybe I'm reading between the lines that it's not necessarily enforceable yet, but it seems to establish that anyone in federal waters would have to be granted a permit through Westpac. Is that accurate, or was it more
No,
of a
that's not accurate. And the thing that's
okay?
confusing is the PEIS is the environmental document.
Mhm.
Normally, when there's a rulemaking for a new kind of permit, which essentially is what we were talking about there, normally that rulemaking contains the PEIS or the EIS within it.
Mhm.
And in our region, when they decided, this was before my time, but when they decided to go through trying to create a permitting program within the FEP system, the Fishery Environmental Ecosystem Plan system within our Fisheries Management Council, they decided to split out the NEPA process, do that first, and then develop a permitting program second. So normally when you see a NEPA document, it's attached to an action. And right now, the action it's attached to is that permitting program that just isn't, it doesn't exist, essentially.
Okay, so we can
There's nothing here saying that you have to get a permit through um, through Westpac to be able to do aquaculture here. But right now, aquaculture requests for permits in federal waters do go through our office to figure out how they fit into existing regulations. There's just not a coordinated permitting program for it. And our
okay.
PEIS for that actually was very broad. It covered all federal waters throughout the entire region. And an AOA PEIS would be smaller than that. It would identify just the areas that came out of that mapping process in phase one, and then would analyze just those areas. So
Okay,
it would be like tiering or a subset of that.
that's informative. Another question, and then I'll sort of wrap up mine. Submissions of comments from our region. A number of us, I'm sure, are kind of organizing comments to come in. And I guess a question is, what is kind of the most useful structure? I mean, there are some guidelines in terms of how you want this, but is it individual letters that demonstrate and support the different bullet points? Is it a single omnibus letter from a unified group? I'm kind of talking with my sci-farm hat on. I'm talking with collaborating with industry. And so I'm just wondering, like, what would NOAA like to receive? What is most compelling to get the Pacific Islands to be the next AOA focus?
If that's something you're going for, I would say either of those strategies would work, because when the comments come in, if there's an omnibus letter that is one comment, but from a number of different entities or people, we always note who all is on that omnibus letter too. So that isn't necessarily heavier weight than a bunch of individuals saying that they're part of a group that also supports it, if that makes any sense. So either way, they will be recorded and identified. It really is up to you. But I hear you on the like trying to figure out the best strategy to show the support that you're gathering. Um, I think just submitting the comment to begin with is the most important thing. And how you want to do that is up to you. But showing that support, just making sure if you do an omnibus letter that every person or entity that is signing on is identified in there.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thanks, Eric. We have a question from Tyler in the chat here. Have there been obstacles in identifying AOAs in the Pacific regions?
Well, so far we don't have AOAs identified in our region, and the closest, well, I guess there's two other Pacific ones would be Alaska and Gulf of California. So in California, that process is completed all through both phases. And I think some of the obstacles that they run into and any of the previous or current AOA processes have run into is really just making sure that we're reaching the right people and have the right people in the room when we're starting to work through the participatory mapping phases. But so far, we haven't done anything with AOAs specifically in our Pacific Islands region. So Tyler, if you want to clarify like a specific region you're asking about, go for it. But hopefully that helped answer your question.
Thank you. Sorry, it's maybe a poorly worded question. I guess I was asking like why haven't AOAs been identified in the Pacific regions, or like why haven't efforts been made to identify AOAs here?
Oh, I get it. Yeah, that is a different question than I answered. Thanks for clarifying. Really, it's been down to capacity and who was ready. So when this executive order came out, so also for just maybe background info, I started in this position in February of 2020, and the AOA, the EO that requested AOAs, that came out in May of 2020. And so I've thankfully been able to kind of watch from afar as a lot of this has been developing. But from the early phases, the first question was, where should we go first? And those first two areas identified had active projects and some other kind of enabling factors as far as like regional plan teams, if you know what that is. That's basically multiple agencies coming together, all sharing information and knowledge about a specific topic. So like in the Gulf, there was already plan teams developed between like the EPA and the Army Corps and NOAA, just all around aquaculture permitting. So they already had these kind of established on the permitting side of things. Again, this is not a permitting process, but it's all stuff that leads to permitting. So it was helpful to have those kinds of things established in the region. So those are kind of some of the considerations there. I was not part, and I will not be part of determining where we go next. All of the regional coordinators like me, we do sit within our region, and then this decision of where to do another AOA process is what we call headquarters driven. And so we help inform them, help them take the temperature on the ground of like, whether people are interested or not. I also wanted to point out too, I should have mentioned this while I was talking about it, but this request for information is not just where should we go next, it's also where should we avoid next. There might be some strong interest in not having aquaculture in a certain area or a certain type of aquaculture in a certain region. So that would also be really helpful information to have in this public comment period. Is that closer to what you were asking, Tyler?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Tori, I had a question. Um, Now that you have the Southern California or Gulf of California and Alaska AOAs completed, have they been utilized? Have there been in terms of aquaculture, have there been companies that have come in, used the framework to help with their permitting?
That's a good question too. That's something we're always asking from the regional side, is like, we want to make sure that what we do is useful for the regions that we serve. And I know that both have been used as kind of like for projects, like prospective projects. They've been able to look at the EIS or use some of the mapping when they're thinking about potentially siting. And there was, I don't remember exactly where it was, but my counterpart in California, her name is Celia Barroso. She forwarded something along from one of the state agencies that was thanking NOAA for the AOA process because it was helping with some state level stuff too. I think just at the end of the day, it's essentially, that phase one, I think, is probably the most interesting to most places because it's a lot of data in some places, some areas that haven't gotten a lot of attention for some of this oceanographic data, and that those data are just, they're overlying information from multiple stakeholder groups, including federal and state agencies for recreational fishing, or what we call non-commercial fishing, commercial fishing, and all this kind of stuff. So I think that has been the most intriguing for a lot of people. And then the other aspect of it is that PEIS that comes out of it, programmatic environmental EIS, environmental impact statement. That is just basically another library of information, but it's a library of environmental information that you can just pull, copy, paste for your environmental docs if you're trying to work on some site analysis stuff too. So from my understanding, I don't think that there have been any projects that have actually cited in an AOA, but the outcomes of the process have been useful when people are thinking about siting in some of those regions, if that's helpful at all.
Hi, I'll just chime in. I think there may be some activities in San Diego that maybe fall in the Southern California. I can't remember if the scope overlaps. There's going to be some folks out from I don't know, one of their like kind of blue economy centers that's based in San Diego Bay, where they've got, I think it's IMTA that's I don't know, I forget it's some seaweed, some shellfish, and something else in cages in the bay, but that could overlap with AOAs, but I don't know which came first. Like it may have been like we have them, it's a good place, and we're also identifying the AOAs are operating there.
Yeah, I think the chicken egg problem there is a real one. I know what area you're talking about, and maybe that's just kind of like the value in a process like this is some of these conversations were already going on in the background, and then having an AOA process there helped further some conversations of some aquaculture that was already kind of trying to figure out how they were going to make it work. I think that is also was part of the driver for going to California as one of the first places, because there were already those kind of like side conversations and rumblings.
Maria, I might have missed it at the beginning. What's the timeline? So there's the public comment period. At some point, there's going to be a selection. And then when would kind of the earliest be that NOAA would actually start working on the activity for an AOA?
Well, we don't know when they would want to announce the next region. I think that's what makes it tough. Announcing the next region would happen, in this. I think that's part of the reason this little roadmap that I've created is is a little bit vague. So the public comments are going to close on September 14th. And then after that, it's probably going to take a couple of months to really make a decision about where to go next. And at that point, it's going to be up to headquarters to decide if and when they want to announce, because some of that will also require, going through this process on the NOAA side of things. I can also say that I scared my camera away. I should stop gesticulating wildly. I can also say that it's pretty resource intensive on our end. And usually when they plan to start an AOA process, they want to get resources in line so that we can have dedicated people for the various aspects of each phase. So dedicated people, dedicated processes, that sort of thing. So the decision to announce where they're going next is all going to be kind of contingent on making sure they have all their ducks in a row and are ready to start once they actually make that announcement.
So reading between the lines, it's making sure whatever budget year this starts in, there's enough allocated to make this happen. So probably no sooner than next summer.
Possibly. Yeah, I would think that they'd at least announce it sometime before next summer. That would be ideal. If they're releasing this RFI now, then that means we've already kind of gone through the early phases of planning and getting our ducks in a row so that whenever we're ready to announce wherever they decide to go, then that can kind of move quicker. So yeah, a lot of that does come down to budget. It comes down to other just kind of internal capacities too, because we might need to hire someone as a contractor or as a term to help with part of the process too. So all of those things are kind of, thankfully, I have not been the point person for any of that either. I've definitely been watching from the sidelines, but that's just kind of what I've gathered is, once we make an RFI about doing another AOA, we'll usually be ready to go, but it's just a matter of getting all of those last ends tied before moving forward. But yeah, the spatial planning aspect of it is pretty hefty and would take for sure 1 year to do like the participatory mapping stuff. And I estimated 2 years on there before. It's kind of been anywhere from like 2 to 3 years, depending on which one we're talking about. Because some of the first two, we were building the plane as we were running it. So, so the Alaska one I think is definitely the one to follow because they've been they specifically requested it in state waters. That's actually not in federal waters. It's in state waters there because that's where their aquaculture industry is. And then we can also follow kind of the timeline that they had, which was about 2 years for the spatial planning part. And then they're in kind of year 2 of that environmental review part.
Well, right on. Other questions for Tori?
I've got more. Oh, yeah, I feel like I'm talking the whole time, but
Go
I've got
for it.
more
Go for it,
questions. Tori, you said that the comment period is not only for, how shall we say, supportive evidence of where you might want to have one, but also providing arguments for what regions maybe shouldn't have them. Did I hear that accurately?
Well, it's not necessarily on a regional level. This is kind of like a data call. So if you know of information of a specific location that would just be unsuitable for aquaculture, then that's information that would be helpful for us too.
Got it.
So not necessarily like don't come anywhere in our region, which of course we're going to receive those comments and we welcome them. But I was really referring to, if you have information about potential stakeholder interactions that, maybe this, I'm just thinking about in our region, there's plenty of user interactions, multiple ocean users in one space, that might be information that would be helpful to have from the start, that kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, that's what we're preparing, I guess. And thanks for clarifying. I was asking more, I wasn't sure if you were saying structure it to promote the Pacific Islands versus the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, the Pacific Northwest as other optional AOA sites. But it sounds like just focus in on more specific sublocations in the AOA location you're trying to propose.
I think that would be the most helpful, yeah. Because I mean, if you look at any of the AOAs that exist so far, I guess maybe not the Alaska ones because they're literally statewide, but They've all been various, they're very specific locations within a given region. We go by regions because that's the way NOAA is split up. But like within a region, you could have multiple AOA processes happening too if you wanted. It's a very vaguely written executive order, and there was no funding that went along with the executive order. So it kind of just comes down to how Office of Aquaculture would like to structure the next one or multiples, or however they want to do that. Um, there's a fair amount of flexibility in there, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, Eric, we definitely still have time. So if you have more questions, or if anybody else has questions.
I'll keep going then. So Tori, I mean, I believe that some of the SciFarm folks have reached out to you, but I'm not sure. I just got back from Indonesia. I've been away for quite a while. Um, your role in any of this is mostly point of contact from NOAA's side, but you're not really interacting with preparation of comments or anything in that capacity. It's really just like you're informative and guidance and advisory, but no participation. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, since it's a NOAA process, I really can't provide public comment, and I can't really guide how those comments happen. But I am here to be a resource if you have questions like we've been answering today, so that I can help you think through what you want to put forward or how you want to put it forward. I'm happy to be there for that.
Okay,
And really, like, my goal today was like, let's see how much of this process we can demystify, because even for me, up until maybe a year ago, a lot of this AOA stuff, even though I was watching it happen and working with my colleagues as they were going through the processes or creating the processes, it's really a lot to wrap your head around, uh, and to think about how it feels like a very big thing, and to think about how it could impact you, your region, your interests, your very specific location within that region. And so I just wanted to offer that opportunity today for us to kind of think through that. And then again, feel free to contact me anytime. That's kind of my role here, is to help kind of translate between multiple worlds. It's a lot of what I do.
Any other?
Okay, I'll keep going.
You done?
Yeah,
Oh,
go ahead.
okay, go ahead. More
I'm trying to
questions, Eric.
leave space if other people have questions. So OAQ, there seems to be growing interest, investment in aquaculture at a national level. USDA also has, I forget what they call it, Office of Aquaculture now or something. How are all of these entities going to collaborate or coordinate with an effort like AOA? Is there any route to bring them in, or is there any leveraging that would be beneficial for this process to help get an AOA in the Pacific Islands?
Well, this is really this is something that Office of Aquaculture is kind of the primary lead and the primary holder for this. Excuse me. And then when it comes to the USDA Office of Seafood and other agency things, like we can look at kind of, especially in the spatial planning side, we bring in every agency possible. So if you look at some of the any of the previous AOAs, especially the first two, the ones in Gulf of Mexico and in Southern California, both of those had pretty heavy input from like DoD and from NASA about like sites that were just like off limits. And so that kind of helped kind of guide or further define and refine those areas that they were identifying. I wasn't part of the spatial planning part of those, so I don't want to speak too detailed about it, but I do know that that was a big aspect and continues to be a big aspect of the spatial planning phase, the multi-stakeholder participatory mapping, as I've been calling it. And the environmental review phase, creating that PEIS document, usually the EPA, since I don't know if this was information to me when I started working with NOAA, but any NEPA document gets published through the EPAs, and usually they're a participating or a cooperating agency on that. So so like our PEIS here, EPA was a cooperating agency, and I think Army Corps I think we asked them to be cooperating, but it was kind of too broad at the time. But that's kind of like, that's some of the agreements and ways that agencies work together on these kinds of things already. And that would absolutely be part of this process.
Yeah, thanks for that. I guess I could have been a little clearer. So I'm thinking more from a funding perspective. You know, when you talk
Oh,
about trying to allocate and support these activities, is there any clear collaboration or coordination that is emerging from this? And thanks for reminding me, Office of Seafood at USDA, OAQ, that, you know, there seems to be some overlapping goals there.
yeah. I think because this one is driven by an executive order that directs NOAA to do the AOA, then it's a pretty in-house NOAA funded process.
Okay.
But I wouldn't be surprised if there were other agencies that wanted to help support too in their own ways. And that kind of, that's not off the table, would totally be up to them. But so far, and what I would expect in the future is it would be a NOAA funded process, primarily through headquarters NOAA, Office of Aquaculture.
Okay. I promise that's my last one. Thanks for everything.
It's okay. I'm happy to answer. That's why we're having it.
One,
Any,
thanks, Tori.
yeah.
Um, just an example, you mentioned Alaska had state waters. So are there examples of like how that process worked and how that request worked within like states requesting for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was actually just asking my counterpart in Alaska. Her name is Alicia Bishop, Alicia in Alaska, very easy to remember. I was asking her exactly how they requested that. And she said that there was a letter from the governor, and then I think a couple of letters, maybe two or three, like letters from state agencies, because they also have like 3 state agencies that touch aquaculture permitting. And then Alaska also has, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's a mariculture group that has a fair amount of funding as well. A lot of it's from the oil spill back in the 80s. And so they were also pretty well resourced to kind of organize around like wanting an AOA. But from what I understand, the main way that their government asked for it was a letter from the governor and at least one, I think 2 letters from state agencies as well.
Thank you. That's good to know.
Yeah, no problem. And that's mostly, again, this is a federal NOAA thing. We want to be really respectful of everyone's own jurisdictions when it comes to waters around their areas. And so that requirement for, we have to be invited. I like to joke about it being a vampire rule, but just want to make sure that we're not stepping on any toes because we already do all this coordination, collaboration on the fishery permitting side of things. So when it comes to aquaculture, pre-permitting, this isn't even pre-permitting, aquaculture things that could lead to permitting or support permitting, we just want to make sure we're just keeping all of our boundaries up and not stepping on toes.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Tori? We reshared the link several times. The links, we'll also try to send out another list to the listserv of the links. But yeah, if you're interested, please follow the links and add your input. Anybody else have questions? Comments? Okay, well, maybe we'll wrap it up. We, as usual, we're gonna post this talk on the Sea Grant brown bag, tech and research brown bag website for you to review later. And Tori also shared her email, so if you have any direct questions for her, please follow up. And thanks, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Tori.